the islands of the Aegean Sea. However, their culture was gradually influenced by the Canaanites, and they eventually adopted the culture of the Semitic world. This can be seen in the transition in pottery styles. The early Philistine pottery, called monochrome because it was decorated with only one color, is similar to ancient Greek and Aegean styles. The later pottery, decorated with two colors and so-called bichrome ware, is closer in style to the pottery of the Canaanites.
Without a doubt, the item most commonly found at the archaeological excavation of any biblical site will be pieces of broken pottery. Most storage containers and dishes in the average house were made of pottery, but pottery made of fired clay broke easily, and things had to be replaced frequently.
First of all, the clay had to be prepared by kneading it repeatedly until it was pliable and had a uniform consistency. The most common way of manufacturing pottery in biblical times was on a turning wheel. A lump of clay was placed in the middle of a small round table. This table was connected by a rod to a heavy wooden or stone wheel below. The potter turned the lower wheel with his foot and shaped the clay with his hands. If he was not satisfied with the way a vessel turned out, he could simply squeeze the soft clay into a lump and start over again.
When the pot was formed to the potter's satisfaction, it was set out in the sun to dry for a few hours. But clay dried in the sun would still break easily. It had to be placed into a special oven where it was baked until it was hard. Because pottery vessels were such common everyday objects, they are frequently used by biblical authors in a symbolic sense. Sometimes the symbol is the ease with which the potter can shape the clay. For example, Jeremiah quotes God as saying, "Like the clay in the potter's hand, so are you in my hand, O house of Israel." At other times, the symbol comes from the fragile nature of clay vessels. Isaiah chapter 41 speaks of the potter treading out the clay with his feet before he brings it to the potter's wheel to work with it. Here, it is a symbol for military conquest.
Even Philistine religion became more and more like the religion of the Canaanites. Philistine divinities mentioned in the Bible, such as Dagon, Ashtaroth, and Baal-Zevuv, have names that were being used in local Canaanite religions. A Philistine temple has been excavated in the northernmost city of the Philistines, a site that is now known as Tel Kasile.
Philistine temples were built in such a way that the ceiling over the central hall was supported by two large wooden columns. The stone bases for such columns can be seen at Tel Kasile. According to the account in Judges, Samson had himself placed between the columns and then pushed them off their bases, causing the roof of the temple to collapse.
During the time of the Judges, the Israelite tribes lived in the hilly regions of South, Central, and North Canaan, as well as in the Transjordan area of Gilead. They didn't live in cities, but in small villages spread over large areas. Members of the same extended family or clan lived together in a village, and members of the same tribe stayed together in the same region. The League of Israelite Tribes was actually quite ineffective. Groups of villages or clans or tribes only acted together on rare occasions. This happened in times of emergency, when a charismatic war leader arose to unite the diverse groups against a common enemy such as Moab or Ammon. These leaders were the biblical judges. The book of Judges, chapters 4 and 5, describes an exceptional case when Barak and Deborah united a larger group of tribes against the king of Hatzor. This story shows that the plains were still firmly under the influence of the Canaanite city-states. Faced with pressures from Canaanites and Philistines, the Israelites chose themselves a king to lead a united army. The first king of Israel was Saul from the tribe of Benjamin. At the beginning of his reign, Saul won several victories in battles against the Philistines, the Ammonites, and the Amalekites. These successes consolidated his power over Israelite tribes other than his own, even though he was never king of a unified kingdom. It's not clear from the text just how long Saul reigned.
In a later battle with the Philistines, Saul and 3 of his sons were killed on Mount Gilboa, and Saul's body was hung from the wall of the city of Beth Shean.
After Saul's death, the elders of Judah crowned David, a man from their own tribe, as their king. David began his reign in about 1000 BC. The northern tribes remained loyal to the house of Saul, but gradually David gained influence over all the tribes of Israel. About 7 years after Saul's death, David was anointed king again, this time by the northern tribes. For a time, all the tribes of Israel were united in the person of King David. The ceremony for installing a new king included pouring olive oil over his head. This was called anointing. For the Israelite kings, anointing was a sacred act carried out by a prophet, or in one case, a priest. The oil was usually poured from the horn of an animal. Possibly for this reason, the horn is often a symbol of power and authority in the Bible.
David managed to break the power of the Philistines. His most important military success was the conquest of Jerusalem, the city of the Jebusites. The city he conquered was small, located on a hill just to the south of another hill called Zion. Jerusalem provided no natural resources, not even a very significant source of water. Even so, David chose to make Jerusalem his capital. This was a wise choice. The city was a neutral territory, not belonging to any of the tribes, and its strategic position in the center of the area settled by the tribes of Israel was of great importance for the process of building a nation.
David made Jerusalem the cultic, administrative, and military center of Israel. In the course of his reign, he added large areas to his kingdom. He took control of the valley of Jezreel and brought under his rule all of Galilee and a large portion of the Transjordan area. He subdued the Ammonites and the Moabites who occupied the Transjordan plateaus and made them pay large yearly tributes. The book of Kings describes the siege of Rabat Ammon, the capital of Ammon, which was taken by David's general Joab.
David also extended his kingdom southwards into the Negev, where he came into conflict with the Edomites. He defeated the Edomites and placed military garrisons in their country.
In a relatively short time, David had established a kind of mini-empire, but it did not last long. His son Solomon did not make any military advances or conquer more land. Instead, he profited greatly from diplomatic advances and trade. Solomon also became known as a man of wisdom and culture. His building program was impressive. Solomon received help from his ally and trading partner Hiram, who was king of the Phoenician city of Tyre. For over 20 years, Solomon sent Hiram wheat and olive oil from Israel in exchange for timber and building expertise from the Lebanon. In fact, all the architects and chief craftsmen designing and constructing the buildings in Jerusalem were Phoenicians. Solomon converted the area of the small fortress of the city of David into a royal capital by adding to it the Temple Mount, which his father David had already purchased. This hill, known variously as Zion or Moriah, became the Acropolis or sacred upper part of the city. It is frequently referred to, especially in the Psalms and with intentional religious exaggeration, as the Holy Mountain. The prophets sometimes refer to it as the Mountain of the Lord. The temple and the royal palace were situated on a raised platform on this hill. By creating the structure, the king was also symbolically elevated above all his people. The houses of the residents of Jerusalem were all situated at significantly lower levels. Solomon expanded the area of the capital from about 12 acres to 30 acres. The total population of the city is estimated to have been around 1,500 during Solomon's reign.
After Solomon's death, the empire split into two kingdoms and collapsed. The southern kingdom continued to be ruled by descendants of David and was called Judah. The larger northern kingdom was sometimes called Israel, sometimes Jacob or Ephraim. It was ruled at first by Jeroboam, who had rebelled against the Davidic rule.
Jeroboam I constructed two huge open-air altars, one in the south of his kingdom at Bethel and one in the north at Dan. In both places he set up images of golden bulls. The bull was a major symbol of the Canaanite god Baal. Baal, the god of storms, rain, and fertility, was the chief god of the Canaanites. They believed that his power made it possible to defeat Mot, the god of death, in a battle that was repeated each year with the coming of spring. The Bible often refers to the female deity Asherah. She was a goddess of fertility and may have been the female companion of Baal.
The northern kingdom of Israel suffered from political instability until approximately 800 BC, when the line of Omri began to rule. King Omri founded a new capital on a strategically situated hill, which we see behind me here, a hill that he bought from a man named Shemer. The city was called Shomron, or Samaria, possibly from the name of its original owner. Samaria became a beautiful and wealthy city, the capital of the powerful kingdom of Israel.
There are numerous references in the Bible to the Phoenician cities of Tyre and Sidon. Phoenicia is the Greek name for the northern coastal area of Canaan. The name means dark red, after a certain dye produced by a sea snail. This dye became a famous export commodity of the Phoenicians. Phoenicia consisted of a number of city-states. The most important of these was Tyre, which was built on an island just off the coast of northern Canaan. Tyre normally dominated the other Phoenician cities, such as Sidon and Byblos.
In the first millennium BC, Tyre was the biggest port in the world. It had two port facilities, the Egyptian port and the Phoenician port. Tyre was renowned for its luxury and liberal lifestyle. It was a melting pot of cultures and a center of civilization. The famous wood from the cedars of Lebanon was transported from here to Egypt and to the west.
Divers still find small statues of Phoenician soldiers and Egyptian women in the sea.
The Phoenicians were famous in the ancient world as sailors. With their wooden ships, they could transport many people and large amounts of cargo. Two means of propulsion were used. Sails attached to a mast caught the wind and so moved the ship. In some ships, oars were used to row when there was insufficient wind or when it was necessary to maneuver the ship in a confined space. The ship was steered by one or two oars that projected from the back of the ship. When the ship was in port or stopping offshore, it was held in place by an anchor attached to a rope. Anchors could be made of iron, but they were often a large stone with a hole in it.
Byblos was the most ancient of the Phoenician cities. It was situated on an island and surrounded by walls. From Byblos, the Phoenicians spread the alphabet through their many commercial contacts throughout the Mediterranean world. On the sarcophagus of King Hiram of Byblos, we have the earliest writing to be preserved in Phoenician alphabetic script, dating from about 1000 BC.
The main enemy of the northern kingdom of Israel was the king of Aram, with his capital in Damascus. After the death of King Ahab, Israel became weaker and weaker. King Mesha of Moab rebelled against Israel and refused to pay the annual tribute.
King Jehoram of Israel made an alliance with King Jehoshaphat of Judah, and together they attacked Moab. Threatened with defeat, King Mesha sacrificed his son to his god Chemosh on the wall of the city of Kir Hareset. When the armies of Israel and Judah witnessed this desperate act, they became completely discouraged and returned home without taking the city. The biblical account does not relate the outcome of the campaign. It is quite possible that it failed and that Moab did liberate itself from Israel.
In 1868, a German missionary discovered a meter-high stone containing a Moabite account of the revolt of Moab against Israel. It is called the Stone of Mesha, or the Moabite Stone. The text is a song of praise to the Moabite god Chemosh, who had delivered his people from Israel. It lists all the successes of recapturing former Moabite cities from the Israelites. It does not mention the human sacrifice of the prince. Part of the text reads, "And Chemosh said to me, 'Go, take Nebo from Israel.' So I went by night and fought against it, from daybreak until noon, taking it and slaying all, 7,000 men, boys, women, girls, and maidservants, for I had devoted them to Ashtar Chemosh."
The prophet Amos foresaw the expansion of the Assyrian Empire, which became stronger and stronger in the 8th century BC. The Assyrians indeed became the most powerful nation in the Near East and kept that position for almost 150 years. The backbone of the Assyrian economy was the king's grain fields in the heartland of the country around Nineveh and Nimrod.
The first capital of Assyria was Ashur, a city named after the main god of the Assyrians. The Assyrians moved their capital further northwards, closer to the grain fields. Nimrod, Kosobar, and Nineveh all served as capitals of the great Assyrian Empire. Nineveh was an extremely large city. The book of Jonah says that one needed 3 days to walk across the city. Nineveh had 12 gates, each one dedicated to and named after one of the Assyrian gods.
When the Babylonians and Medes besieged the city in 612, the Assyrians thought they would be safe behind their great defensive walls. However, the Babylonians managed to divert the water of the Tigris and other rivers towards the city walls. The water softened the ground under the wall, and after some months, the wall collapsed, allowing the invading army to enter. The prophet Nahum hints at this event when he says, "The river gates are opened, the palace melts away."
If a conquered state rebelled against Assyria by not paying tribute, or by making an alliance with another state against Assyria, punishment could be swift and harsh. In the extreme case, the Assyrians made the rebellious state into a province of Assyria and deported part of the population. This is what happened to the northern kingdom of Israel. They rebelled against Assyria and even formed an alliance with Egypt. The Assyrians punished them in 722 by deporting part of the population.
On the other hand, the kingdom of Judah resisted all pressure to rebel. This resistance was strengthened by the prophet Isaiah, who advised Ahaz, king of Judah, to be firm and not to give in to pressure. Isaiah prophesied that the rebellious Damascus and Israel would soon be destroyed and that Judah would be spared. It happened just as Isaiah had prophesied. Nevertheless, the successor of Ahaz, King Hezekiah, changed the policy of Judah. He cleansed the temple of statues of gods and other forbidden sacred objects, including an altar for the worship of Ashur. In the ancient Near East, subject kings were obliged to worship the god of their overlord. For Hezekiah, purifying the temple of foreign cultic objects was a religious act, but it was also a political act of rebellion against Assyria.
Hezekiah also repaired the walls of Jerusalem, built new walls around new residential areas, and improved systems of supplying water to the city by constructing a pool and a tunnel. He did all this shortly before the attack by the Assyrians. Jerusalem numbered about 20,000 inhabitants in those days.
Archaeologists have uncovered this portion of Hezekiah's wall, built in the 8th century BC. Even this small section gives some idea of the massiveness of the protective wall of an ancient city. This one was about 7 meters wide, but some could be even wider. Hezekiah built this wall in preparation for the invasion by the Assyrians. In another operation to make the city less vulnerable to attack, Hezekiah blocked off all access to the spring outside the city. He then constructed a long tunnel to bring water inside the walls of Jerusalem. The tunnel was over half a kilometer long. Workmen digging from both ends and probably following a natural crack in the rock met in the middle. There they placed a commemorative plaque, which was later found by archaeologists.
While Hezekiah's building programs were impressive, he had miscalculated the political situation. It was not long before the Assyrians came and conquered Judah.